In the empty desert of northwestern Saudi Arabia, something extraordinary is taking shape. Two parallel walls of mirrored glass, each standing 500 meters tall, stretching 170 kilometers across the sand. A city designed not for cars, not for streets, but for data. This is the line. And according to its creators, it'll be the world's first city run entirely by artificial intelligence. In September 2022, NEOM CEO Nadmi Al-Nassour made a declaration that would define this project forever. Speaking at the Global AI Summit in Riyadh, he announced, "It is a future world that will go live fully on artificial intelligence. Not partially. Not supplemented by AI fully. 9 million people were meant to live inside this structure. Every aspect of their existence, from the temperature of their homes to the routes they walk, from their healthcare to their security, would be monitored, predicted, and managed by algorithms. The cost, $500 billion. Initially, then $1.6 trillion. Then $4.5 trillion. By 2025, internal estimates placed the final price tag at $8.8 trillion, more than 25 times the annual budget of Saudi Arabia itself. This is the story of what happens when artificial intelligence becomes not just a tool for cities, but the city itself. When algorithms don't assist human life, but attempt to replace human judgment entirely. And it is a story that reveals something profound about the limits of technology, the nature of surveillance, and the question of what we are willing to sacrifice for the promise of efficiency. To understand the line, you must first understand a concept that its designers call cognitive city. NEOM describes itself as aiming to build the world's first cognitive city. A city that learns, a city that thinks, a city that, in their words, predicts and reacts to human needs, not the other way around. What does this actually mean? According to NEOM Tech, a digital company, every resident of the line would be assigned a unique identification number. This ID would integrate and process data collected from every interaction that person has with the city. Every purchase, every movement, every conversation in a public space. The company announced plans to create what they call digital twins for every resident. Joseph Bradley, CEO of NEOM Tech and Digital, described this system in an interview with the National, a model of each individual based on their habits, their patterns. Throughout the day, their facial recognition data, their blood type, even their unique genetic sequence. Knowing what you are going to do is actually more valuable than what you do, Bradley explained. The power of prediction creates new and exciting possibilities. Consider what this means. The city wouldn't just respond to your actions. It would anticipate them. It would know where you're going before you decide to go there. It would adjust the temperature in spaces you haven't yet entered. It would route transportation based on where it calculates you will need to be. For the tourist arriving at the line, the experience would be seamless. No passport checkpoint. No baggage carousel. No taxi istan. You step off the plane. Biometric identification recognizes you through retina scan or facial recognition. Your bags are delivered to a hotel room that unlocks as you approach the door. And an autonomous taxi is already waiting at the curb because the system knew you were coming. It sounds like magic, but the magic has a mechanism, and that mechanism requires something precious. Your data. All of it. Data will also be collected from resident smartphones, their homes, facial recognition cameras, and a host of other sensors. That's a direct quote from Joseph Bradley. He called it a data sweep that would feed information back to the city and help it predict user needs. In February 2022, NEOM Tech and Digital Company announced M3LD, a consent management platform designed to let residents control how their data is used. The promise was transparency. Residents could see who had their data, how it was being used, and they could opt out at any time. There was another feature. Residents would be paid for their data. Without trust, there is no data, Bradley said. Without data, there is no value. The implication was clear. Your information has worth. The city needs it to function. If you share more, you receive more. But digital rights experts immediately raised alarms. Marwa Fatafta, regional policy manager at Access Now, called it a privacy disaster waiting to happen. She added, "Tricking users into using a private consent platform does not replace data protection regulation. Adding money as an incentive is a terrible idea. It distorts the right of people to freely consent and normalizes the practice of selling personal data for profit." Vincent Mosco, a researcher who studies the social impacts of technology, was more direct. The surveillance concerns are justified, he said. It is, in effect, a surveillance city. The phrase caught attention. A surveillance city, not a smart city. Not even a cognitive city, a surveillance city. And this raised a question that no promotional video could answer. In a country where dissent is silenced, where journalists have been murdered, where activists have been tracked using sophisticated spyware, what happens when the government has access to every movement, every conversation, every pattern of behavior of 9 million residents? To understand why privacy experts were alarmed, consider what Saudi Arabia has already done with surveillance technology. In October 2018, journalist Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. He never walked out. He was murdered by a 15-member squad of Saudi operatives. His body investigation by Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto revealed that, in the months before his death, Saudi Arabia had used Pegasus, spyware developed by Israeli company NSO Group to hack the phone of Omar Abdulaziz, a Saudi dissident and close confidant of Khashoggi. Through that compromised phone, Saudi intelligence gained access to their private conversations. Abdulaziz later stated that the software revealed Khashoggi's private criticisms of the Saudi royal family, which played a major role in his death. The spyware didn't stop there. Ben Hubbard, Middle East correspondent for the New York Times, was targeted repeatedly between 2018 and 2021 while writing a book about Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos was allegedly targeted after exchanging messages with the Crown Prince. The wife of Khashoggi, Hanan Elator, had Pegasus installed on her phone while she was being interrogated in custody in the UAE. 2021 investigation by 17 media organizations revealed that Saudi Arabia was among 11 countries using Pegasus to target journalists, activists, and dissidents. At least 180 journalists from 20 countries were selected for targeting with NSOs. This is the context in which the line proposes to collect facial recognition data, movement patterns, health information, genetic sequences, and purchasing behavior on 9 million people. NEOM officials said they were addressing privacy concerns. Saudi Arabia had introduced a personal data protection law, but as one human rights report noted, a lack of transparency over the possibility of opting out of data mining is particularly concerning, given the Saudi authorities' track record in cyber surveillance of human rights activists. The question isn't whether the technology can be built. The question is who controls it and what they've done before. There is a precedent for what the line is attempting cities built from scratch around technology, and that precedent should give pause. Songdo International Business District in South Korea costs $40 billion. It was built on 600 hectares of land reclaimed from the Yellow Sea, designed to be the world's smartest city. Sensors everywhere, pneumatic tubes to carry waste underground, video conferencing built into every apartment, CCTV cameras monitoring for suspicious behavior. It was meant to house 300,000 people. As of 2024, it is roughly 100,000, and much of the development remains empty. Residents describe it as lonely. For younger people, it's a bit more of a lonely city. Actually, one resident told another said, "I felt something cold when I arrived here. The complaint wasn't about temperature. It was about the lack of human warmth." A professor of sociology at Ain Shams University, Samia, explained the pattern. Human connections are a key social infrastructure. Complex data infrastructure does not usually cater to important social and cultural needs that are paramount to urban life. Songdo had the technology. It had the investment. What it didn't have was what makes cities alive: the serendipitous encounters, the organic communities, the messy humanity that algorithms cannot predict or replicate. In 2020, Google's sister company, Sidewalk Labs, abandoned its smart city project in Toronto after years of controversy over privacy and data governance. Canadian civil liberties groups had called it a colonizing experiment in surveillance. Capitalism Jim Bolsley, co-founder of BlackBerry Maker Research in Motion, said the withdrawal was a beautiful vindication for opponents. It had to be this way for the lesson to sink in. The lesson was this: you cannot build a city like you build a software platform. Cities are not operating systems that can be optimized. They are living organisms that must be allowed to evolve. But the line proposed something even more extreme than Sangdo or Toronto. Not a smart neighborhood. Not a digital district. An entire linear city, 170 kilometers long, where 9 million people would live inside a single structure, monitored continuously, their behavior predicted before they acted. Consider the physical design of the line itself. Two parallel mirrored walls, each 500 meters tall, separated by a gap of just 200 meters. Inside that narrow canyon, all of human life would unfold: residential areas, offices, schools, parks, entertainment, healthcare. There would be no cars. No streets in the traditional sense. Transportation would occur on a separate underground layer. The pedestrian layer would be sandwiched between the service layer below and the mirrored facades on either side. Everything within 5 minutes walk. Everything monitored. An airport integrated into the structure would use biometric scanning to eliminate checkpoints. You would be pre-cleared, identified, tracked, and processed before you even stepped off the plane. If you were immobile for too long, a drone could be deployed to check on you. Bradley described this as a benefit. Your location, health, and movement data would allow the city to care for you. But who defines too long? Who decides what counts as suspicious inactivity? Who determines when the drone should come? The infrastructure that can send a drone to help you is the same infrastructure that can send a drone to watch you. The system that predicts your needs is the same system that predicts your behavior. The technology doesn't distinguish between assistance and control. This is the paradox at the heart of the line. The same AI that promises to make life seamless also promises total visibility. There would be no hidden corners in this city, no private spaces unmonitored, no movements unrecorded. For residents who trust the system, this might feel like convenience. For residents who don't or who can't afford to be seen, it would feel like a cage. By 2024, the line was in trouble. The original plan had called for 20 modules of housing across 16 kilometers to be completed by 2030, with residents moving in as early as 2025. But costs had spiraled beyond control. The budget had grown from $500 billion to potentially $8.8 trillion. Foreign investment failed to materialize. The oil prices that fund Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund declined, and the engineering challenges proved far greater than anticipated. According to reporting by the Financial Times, based on interviews with more than 20 people who worked on the project, the line was undone by the laws of physics and finance. The plans were scaled back dramatically, from 20 modules to 3, from 170 kilometers to 2.4 kilometers, from 9 million residents to fewer than 300,000 by 2030. Some foundations had already been built for structures that would never rise. At least $50 billion had been spent. Thousands of workers had excavated across the desert. Giant piling rigs had drilled 6,000 foundations into the ground. And then, in September 2025, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund suspended work on the construction project until further notice. In January 2025, NEOM Deputy CEO Rayan Fayez acknowledged that the line might take a 100-year timeframe to construct and populate. 100 years. For a project that was supposed to define the future of cities by 2030, the vision of a city run fully by artificial intelligence had collided with reality. Not the reality of what AI can do, but the reality of what cities require to exist. The technological ambitions of the line drew attention. The human cost of its construction drew far less. The Hawatat tribe had lived in the Tavuk province for generations. When NEOM was announced, their ancestral lands fell within the project zone. They were told to leave. In April 2020, Abdul Rahim Al-Huwaiti posted videos on social media opposing the forced evictions. Days later, he was shot dead by Saudi security forces in his home. In October 2022, 3 of his relatives, Shadli Ibrahim and Atala Al-Huwaiti, were sentenced to death for refusing to vacate their village. Around 20,000 people are expected to be forcibly relocated for NEOM. Villages have been razed. Communities that existed for centuries are being erased for a city that may never be completed. Meanwhile, the construction workforce at its peak numbered over 200,000, mostly migrant workers from South Asia and Southeast Asia. Saudi Arabia's kafala sponsorship system ties these workers to their employers. Their passports are often confiscated. They cannot change jobs or leave the country without permission. Recruitment debt traps many before they even arrive. Human rights organizations have documented allegations of worker deaths and disappearances on Vision 2030 projects. The exact numbers are impossible to verify because Saudi Arabia does not publish foreign worker fatality statistics. This is the foundation upon which the AI-managed city was being built, not just concrete and steel, but displacement and exploitation. The algorithms that would predict residents' needs were designed on land cleared by force. The digital twins that would model residents' behavior would exist in a structure built by workers with few rights and little freedom. The promotional materials showed gleaming renders of people strolling through sunlit plazas. They did not show the workers laboring in desert heat, or the families forced from their homes, or the activists sentenced to death for speaking out. What does the line tell us about the future of cities? Perhaps this technology alone cannot build a civilization. Data cannot substitute for community. Prediction cannot replace freedom. The line proposed something unprecedented: a city where artificial intelligence would govern every aspect of human existence, where algorithms would anticipate needs before they were felt, where efficiency would be measured in data points, and life itself would become an input for machine learning. The vision was seductive. No traffic, no pollution, no waste, no friction. Everything optimized, everything monitored, everything known. But knowledge is power, and in the wrong hands, total knowledge becomes total power. The same sensors that could detect a health emergency could detect a political meeting. The same facial recognition that could unlock your door could identify you at a protest. The same digital twin that modeled your habits could predict your descent. NEOM promised that residents would control their data, that they could opt out, that they would even be paid for sharing information. But in a country where a journalist was murdered for his private conversations, where dissidents are tracked across borders, where tribal leaders are executed for refusing relocation, what does consent actually mean? The project has been scaled back. Construction has been suspended. The 100-year timeline suggests that the line, as originally envisioned, may never be completed. But the questions it raised will not disappear. As cities around the world embrace smart technology, as sensors proliferate and AI systems grow more sophisticated, the issues that the line confronted in extreme form will emerge everywhere. How much surveillance is acceptable for convenience? Who owns the data that cities collect? What happens when the infrastructure built to serve us becomes the infrastructure that controls us? South Korea's Songdo feels lonely. Toronto rejected Google's smart neighborhood. Masdar City in Abu Dhabi abandoned its master plan. And the line, the most ambitious attempt to build an AI-governed city in history, has stalled in the Saudi desert. Perhaps there is wisdom in these failures. Perhaps they teach us that cities are not problems to be solved, but places to be lived. That the mechanisms of human interaction cannot be optimized away. That privacy is not inefficiency, but dignity. That freedom means the right to be unpredictable. The foundations drilled into the Saudi desert stand as monuments to a vision that exceeded its grasp. The mirrored facades, where they exist, reflect nothing but sand and sky. 9 million digital twins will never be created. The world's first cognitive city will not predict its residents' needs. The future that was supposed to go live fully on artificial intelligence remains unrealized. And somewhere in that unrealized future, perhaps, is a lesson that the most sophisticated algorithm cannot replicate what happens when strangers meet by chance on a city street. That the most complete dataset cannot capture the complexity of a human life. That the city of the future must be built not by machines that know everything, but by people who are free to become anything. The desert wind blows through the construction site. The mirrored glass reflects the empty sky, and the city run by artificial intelligence remains. For now, a city that exists only in renders and press releases. Perhaps that is where it belongs.